So, good evening, everybody. So the topic of this class, it's in some ways a continuation of the class from 4 weeks ago on who is a Jew. Specifically, I'm calling this "Where the Rubber Meets the Road," because what I'm going to do eventually is discuss with you certain cases that I have actually dealt with in my career as a rabbi, which were sort of on the border or unclear in terms of the status, and discuss how you would have dealt with them if you were in my place, and then let you know how I dealt with them. But before I do that, since we discussed in the class 4 weeks ago the law of return, and since then the Israeli Supreme Court has made a major decision, and it was 8 out of 9 justices on the court, so it's not even like a close decision, regarding the question of who is a Jew under the law of return. And this is a little complicated because it is something that is widely misunderstood by myriads of American Jews who come to me why should I support Israel when Israel doesn't even think I'm really Jewish, or they don't think my kids are really Jewish, or whatever. That's actually a misstatement of fact. The law of return, as we saw, those of you who were in the class anyway, says that the definition of a Jew under the law of return is somebody born of a Jewish mother who has not changed to another religion, or somebody who has converted. The law of return does not clarify what converted means, but the way it has been understood in practice is that somebody who has converted in any recognized Jewish community abroad is considered Jewish for purposes of the law of return. Okay, what this means is if you have converted with any rabbi who serves a community, whether that's a shul rabbi or a Hillel rabbi, it's mostly either shul rabbis or Hillel rabbis, regardless of the denomination, you will be accepted as Jewish by the state of Israel for purposes of becoming a citizen, and also your identity card under nationality will say Jewish. However, certain things are under the jurisdiction of the Orthodox chief rabbinate, especially, for example, burial in state cemeteries, but they have set up alternative cemeteries because there are frankly a lot of people in Israel who are not halakhically Jewish. I'm not even talking about Christians or Muslims. People who think of themselves as Jews but are not halakhically Jewish could be as many as 1 million people, given the massive influx from the former Soviet Union and their children and their grandchildren, so that you will have difficulty getting buried in Israel. You will have difficulty getting married in Israel, although it's not that big a deal because there are alternative forms of marriage. For example, believe it or not, people in Israel are getting married. Two people who live in Israel are getting married over Zoom in Utah. Okay. And then because of norms of international law, if it's recognized in one country, it's generally recognized in all countries. So they're getting married by Zoom in Utah, and then the state of Israel will recognize them as married. It used to be that people flew to Cyprus. It was a very lucrative industry, but since COVID, that's gone down. However, if you had a non-Orthodox, not considered valid for the law of return.
It broke up. Could you repeat that?
Now, a non-Orthodox conversion in Israel, it was not considered valid for purposes of the law of return. Okay, and that's what the Supreme Court ruled, that non-Orthodox conversions in Israel have to be recognized for purposes of the law of return. Now, in point of fact, this is a very small number of people, right? But it can and has led to some severe hardship, because who are the people who have they're often non-Jewish spouses of Israelis whose legal status in Israel is dependent on their relationship with their spouse. And if they get divorced, they have to leave the country. Okay. Now, for example, I don't talk about this a lot, but I lived in Israel for 2 years. From 1986 to 1988, I was already an ordained rabbi. And I started working with a young woman on her conversion. She was a German non-Jew married to a secular Jewish Israeli. And as she progressed in her conversion studies, she got more and more into Judaism to the point that it caused a tension in her relationship. Okay. This is not unusual, by the way. It's not unusual. It caused a tension in her relationship. They broke up. Because of that, she was no longer legally in Israel. She had to go back to Germany to finish her conversion. And having converted in Germany, she could then make Aliyah, which she did. But these are the kind of, they don't affect huge numbers of people, but they are tragic cases sometimes. So as I said, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled that non-Orthodox, which means essentially conservative or reform, these are the two functioning non-Orthodox streams in Israel, and they have Batei Din. It's a much more formalized system than it is in the States, but reform and conservative conversions under the conservative, under those Batei Din in Israel now are recognized for purposes of the law of return. Doesn't mean they can get married in Israel. They'll still have issues with that. The reaction to it is interesting, but that is more in terms of, internal Israeli politics. I mean, for example, Benjamin Netanyahu said that he was very concerned about this ruling because it would enable fake conversions to be recognized in Israel, which is ironic if you realize that Sarah Netanyahu is wife number 3. Wife number 2 had a conservative conversion in Cambridge under Rabbi Ben-Zion Gold, who's somebody I knew. He was the rabbi of Harvard Hillel, a conservative rabbi, who converted Mrs. Netanyahu number 2 and then officiated at their wedding. So at least in the early 1980s, Netanyahu didn't have any problem with conservative conversions. But now he does. Okay. I don't think he's found religion. I think he's found political convenience. But
he's got an election in 2 weeks.
Huh?
He's got an election in a couple of weeks.
I know he does. Is that my yesh? So that briefly, that's that. If there are any questions on this, I'll be happy to entertain them. If not, we'll move on. All right, great. So I will start. So before we get into the case studies, I have 3 case studies. Some of you may find the first 2 familiar, okay? Because when I came to interview almost 9 years ago, and we had a Havdalah program Saturday night, and I was asked to make a presentation.
Mhm.
And I made a presentation discussing these two case studies. Okay, so some of you were there. Some of you may even remember the cases, if not the discussion. But people change, people's attitudes change. Clearly, not everybody in the class was there at that program, so I thought it was worthwhile. So, but I'm presenting three cases tonight. So the third case is not one that I just. In fact, I had forgotten about it until I was reminded of it recently. So, um, okay. So, case number one, Marilyn and Lindsay. Marilyn and Josh have been married for about 10 years. He is Jewish, but for most of his adult life had not been particularly observant. She is a Unitarian Universalist. They have an adoptive daughter, Lindsay, who came to them at age 8 after being taken away from her birth mother due to the mother's substance abuse. Lindsay is now 16. She still has occasional supervised visits with her birth mother, who has terminal cancer. Lindsay has significant psychological and emotional problems stemming from her very difficult childhood. Marilyn and Josh had originally decided when they got married to go together regularly to both the Unitarian congregation and Josh's Reformed temple. But Josh was very uncomfortable at the Unitarian congregation and always found one reason or another not to go with Marilyn and Lindsay. Marilyn finally decided that Josh is a Jew and that's that, and she stopped asking him to go with them, though the two of them continued to go to synagogue with Josh. They also, over the last several years, have incorporated more Judaism into their home life. They are vegans and thus already basically keep kosher. They light Friday night candles and say Kiddush over wine and motzi over challah, and observe many of the other home rituals like a Passover Seder and lighting Hanukkah candles. A couple of months ago, Marilyn discovered that Lindsay described her religious views as Unitarian and Jewish on her Facebook page, and she discussed it with Lindsay and Josh. Marilyn and Lindsay both say they feel Jewish and want to make it official by converting. However, Marilyn also feels very strongly that she and Lindsay need to continue to be part of the Unitarian congregation. Lindsay needs stability in her life, and the members there have been an important support system for her. The Unitarian minister is closer to Lindsay than the rabbi of the temple is, and has been helping Lindsay prepare for her birth mother's impending death and will officiate at the funeral when the time comes. So the plan is to be part of both the Reformed Jewish Temple and the Unitarian congregation, attending one on Friday nights and the other on Sunday mornings. You are one of the rabbis who has been asked to sit on the Beit Din, the court of three rabbis, which must approve the conversion before it can take place. The rabbi of Josh's temple has shared this story in advance. Are you willing to approve this conversion? Why or why not? Okay, and so for a little bit more context of the situation, so I dealt with this when I was in Norwich, Connecticut, and in the Norwich area, Norwich, New London area, there's a conservative congregation in Norwich where I was the rabbi, another conservative congregation in New London, and in Waterford, which is adjacent to New London but towards Norwich, there's a Reformed temple. And the rabbi of the Reformed temple there was fairly traditional. And he, as a general rule, asked the two conservative rabbis to serve on the Beit Din with him when he did a conversion, so that the conversion would be more broadly accepted. In other words, if you had a conversion certificate that, even though the main rabbi was Aaron Rosenberg, if you went to any conservative shul in the country and showed this conversion certificate that it was also signed by me and Rabbi Astor, that conservative shul would accept you as Jewish without any question. So he liked to, when possible, have the two of us serve on the Beit Din for his converts. However, he already had an inkling that this might be problematic. Okay, and the worst thing that you want is to bring somebody to the Beit Din and then the Beit Din says no, right? And certainly when I have a candidate, I prepare the other rabbis on the Beit Din beforehand, and I have never had a candidate rejected by a Beit Din. I have sat on Batei Din that have rejected candidates. Okay, and it is an unpleasant experience for everybody, especially the sponsoring rabbi. And so, to make sure that there was no unpleasantness, he called this to our attention beforehand, thinking that there might be a problem. Okay, so now with that background, how would you handle this situation if you were one of those conservative rabbis? What would you do? Feel free to jump in. I mean, this is going to be very boring if there's no discussion.
Well, I would, I mean, the question is, do you think Unitarian Universalism is avodah zarah that would disqualify a conversion candidate?
I mean, that's perhaps the halachic question.
It's sociological too.
But it's sociological too. I mean, look, avodah zarah means idolatry. All right. Clearly, it's not avodah zarah, right? I mean, it's not. They're not idolaters. I mean, most of them are agnostics or atheists, right? I mean, you know, my brother's a Unitarian Universalist. In fact, he's the president of his congregation this year. You know, whatever I may or may not think about Unitarian Universalism, it's certainly not idolatry.
Okay.
Having said that, you know, a Beit Din is not required to accept a candidate, you know, just because they may not have a halachic sort of red line that disqualifies them, right? I mean, so I mean, that would be a more b'diavad question than a lechatchila question, meaning that would be a more ex post facto than ab initio. In other words, for example, if my brother came to our shul, would I say because he's a Unitarian Universalist, we can't count him for the minyan, or we can't give him an aliyah or something like that? I wouldn't say that, all right, because it's not a form of idolatry such that it disqualifies. But my brother's already a Jew, right? The question of sort of disqualifying somebody from being counted as part of the Jewish community who's already Jewish is different than would you, right? In the same way that, you know, there are all kinds of things that you can do if you're already a U.S. citizen that will get you deported or disqualified from citizenship if you're not a citizen, fair or not. So
that being said, I think that on a technical note, if someone were to say, I want to become Jewish and yet I want to be, remain a part of the United Methodist Church, I would absolutely say pick one. But Unitarian Universalism, you know, being such a gray area as it is, what's not to say that, you know, continuing to be part of that, whatever it is, precludes one from participating in meaningful Jewish life.
No, I agree with you. It's not so clear. I mean, if the facts of the case were identical except that you struck out Unitarian Universalist and wrote in United Methodist, or for that matter, if you wrote Ahmadiyya Mosque, um, there'd be no question, right? There'd be no question, precisely because Unitarian Universalism is in this kind of liminal area. That's what makes it a question. Alan, I saw you had a hand up.
This is tricky, and it's interesting to me because I'm trying to think of how I would argue it to say that it should be a conversion. But if you look at it from the perspective of a bet din, the overall, it seems that the main reason, the main impetus toward becoming Jewish is for Josh's sake, because he is most comfortable in the Jewish tradition. These two, while they have some thought about the Jewish tradition and apparently like it, they're more comfortable in the Unitarian position and they get comfort there. I agree with Barnaby. I think you have to be fish or fowl. And I think at this point, they might want to study more Judaism. They may want to truthfully find a rabbi or a spiritual advisor that brings them the comfort that they get at the Unitarian Church. But at this point, I don't think that the mere fact that they want to make Josh more comfortable, which is praiseworthy, but I don't think that's an indication of the spiritual commitment that you should make to convert to a religion. So that's what I would rule.
Anyone, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's illogical to me to call a conversion what is to have one foot in each pond. I mean, that's just not a conversion to me. If they, especially, I mean, the mother is Unitarian and she wants to convert, you can't convert to unless you convert from. And if she is interested in actually converting, it doesn't mean to sever all ties. I mean, as I remember the story you told, she had good reasons for maintaining the relationship with the people, including the guy who runs the place. So, but that's not the same as converting. I mean, if you're going to convert, you can maintain those relationships because they're important. You show up as a visitor as opposed to a member. I would say you can't convert that way, though. Right. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I had a thought about.
All right, Toby, and then Sue. Yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of her life at the time, if that's shouldn't be considered. It seems like she had breast cancer. Is that correct?
Well, the birth mother of the young girl has breast cancer, not the adoptive mother. And the adoptive mother is the one who's thinking of converting. Yeah.
No, then I'll.
Yeah. Okay. So.
No.
Unmute.
You're muted.
I'm sorry. I agree with everybody. I find that there's something very problematic to me about her, you know, not wanting to really let go of one faith. And, you know, it's like, you know, she wants to have her cake and eat it too. She doesn't want to give anything up. And, you know, as much as we might talk about, you know, some faiths like Buddhism or Unitarianism as being like, you know, full of people that maybe are very atheistic or whatever, there's no real God or whatever, still Unitarianism does accept the New Testament. They do include it in their services. They celebrate Christian holidays, even if they don't consider themselves Christian. So, you know, I mean, you have to look at all of that. If she is really interested in converting to Judaism, I think, you know, she needs to decide what she really wants to do.
Right. Okay. So let me tell you how we handled it at the time and what my thoughts are now. Um, we didn't agree to sit on the baked in. The reform rabbi wasn't surprised. He went ahead and did the conversion on his own without us, which is fine under the rules of Reform Judaism. It would mean that she would not be accepted as a Jew in conservative circles. Um, you know, but I always tell people, look, if you have a conversion that meets the standards of one group but not another group, if you want to remedy that, you could always convert again. I mean, if you have a conservative conversion, which means that you're unlikely, although not impossible, but unlikely to be accepted in the Orthodox community, well, if you decide that the Orthodox community is your place, you can have a second Orthodox conversion. So, that's not a barrier. So we did not participate, and he did the conversion on his own. Um, I I'm not 100% comfortable today with the decision that we both made then. And people operate out under their own sort of existential situation. I'm a lot more understanding of my brother's Unitarian Universalism now than I was 10 years ago. In fact, my there is a group within the Unitarian Universalist Association called Unitarians for Jewish Awareness, which is kind of a association of Unitarian Jews that my brother has become involved in, and called me a couple of weeks ago and asked me to speak to that group in April. And I was touched. I mean, it meant a lot to me, considering that my brother, our divergent paths, right? Having been raised Reform Jews, and I went this way and he went that way. That is perhaps the biggest source of tension between us. So I'm not 100% comfortable. Having said that, I recently read a responsum from we have the law committee, the reform, it's called the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Central Conference of American Rabbis has a responsa committee. Now their responsa are even less authoritative than the law committee responsa, right? I mean, we generally strive to follow the law committee. As you know, there's only one time in my career that I have ruled contrary to the law committee. And then when the law committee brought their policy on Zoom on Shabbat closer to something that we could live with, we then changed our practice to be in conformance with the law committee. But basically, so the question that the responsa committee was asked was about doing a conversion for the Unitarian fiance of a Reform rabbi who herself was studying to become a Unitarian minister. Okay. And they said no, that she should not be allowed to convert. However, to some extent, it hinged on the fact that she was becoming a minister, right? I mean, if she were, a lay Unitarian, you could read it that they would have ruled differently. But since the CCAR responsive committee said no, I mean, who am I to be more liberal than the Reform rabbinate? So, but it was not an easy decision. But we did say no, and given the same circumstances, I would still say no, but I would be less comfortable with it. And I think sometimes sometimes it's good to make a decision and then be uncomfortable with it. I think that's an okay place to live. Any questions or comments on that? If not, we'll move on to the next one.
I mean,
Go
just to make a final sock, if I will, if I'm just going to inform them that converting comes with the understanding that you are committing to a Jewish way of life, which means that you cannot just dip in and out of. Certainly, if there's an understanding that some practices at the Unitarian congregation might not jive very well with Judaism by large, and they say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we're still going to go take the dunk, then it really all boils down to their commitment to be observant.
Right.
Or
right. I agree with you. I mean, obviously, look, there's an inherent dilemma whenever conservative rabbis help with a reform conversion, right? Because clearly they're not going to be as observant as we would like, right? On the other hand, there's a certain, when we say to Reform Jews, you need to be more Klal Yisrael oriented, right? Like you need to do your conversions according to proper procedures and so on and so forth. And then they come to us and they say, we want to do that, right? We want to do that and we need your help to do that. And then to say, no, we won't help you, right? So there's an inherent tension there. But I agree. I mean, to me, the rejection is more sociological than halachic, right? That is to say, you have not fully embraced Judaism, right? Your embrace of Judaism is tentative or half-hearted. It's not a full embrace, right? And that is what, to me, would ultimately be the barrier to conversion, I think. Okay, so go on to the next case. I'm calling Andrea and Ben. Andrea and Ben are an engaged couple in their early 30s. Ben grew up in a conservative Jewish home. He was a member of USY in high school and was somewhat active in Hillel in college. Since graduating college, he has not been too active in the Jewish community, but he always goes to his parents' synagogue for the high holidays and attends his parents' Passover Seder. He always assumed that when he got married and had kids, that he would join a conservative synagogue in the city where he now lives. Andrea was raised in a Catholic home and attended Catholic parochial schools through 12th grade. When she went to college, she gradually drifted away from her Catholic upbringing and has not attended church for several years, except on occasion for family life cycle events such as a niece's baptism or a nephew's first communion. When Andrea got engaged to Ben, Andrea's mother sat her down and revealed the family's secret. Andrea's mother had actually been born and raised as a Jew, but as a young adult had converted to Catholicism, not for the sake of marriage, but because she really and truly believed that Jesus is the Messiah and the Catholic Church the true religion. She had not told Andrea of her Jewish background before, since she didn't see any point in it. When Andrea told this to Ben, Ben explained to her that under Jewish law, she is in fact a Jew, which meant that they could be married in a Jewish cemetery by a conservative or Orthodox rabbi. This is what Ben had always preferred, but until now, he didn't think it was possible, since conservative and Orthodox rabbis are not permitted to officiate at mixed marriages. Andrea thinks that this would be fine, since she is not a very religious Catholic anymore, and it means a lot to Ben. You are the rabbi who has been asked to perform the wedding. How will you deal with this request?
Wow.
No? Anyone? Yeah, Sue, unmute.
You'd think I'd know by now. I thought that well, I mean, I guess if she actually had a baptism, then the question is, would that mean she was no longer Jewish? But if she was considered Jewish, then my thought would be maybe she would just have to take classes to learn a little more basic things about Judaism before the marriage. But I guess if she was actually baptized, I don't know how that would play into it.
Yeah, but if she was baptized as a baby. She didn't have a choice. You could say she was baptized against her will.
Right.
And meanwhile, she's Jewish, so you can't do a conversion. Well, maybe you can. I don't know.
All right. I'm going to let you guys go on for a bit. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan.
Now, I don't mind talking about matters from the Bet Din standpoint. I've done some judge stuff, but the rabbi stuff is beyond me. But I think this really depends on what you as or any rabbi would want to do individually, more from a sociological standpoint. I don't know that we really know enough. I think that if her desire would be to get married in the Jewish faith and to raise their kids in a Jewish manner and to learn enough so that she could be an effective Jewish mother, I think that's one thing. If it's just to do this because she loves the man she's going to marry, that's wonderful, but it's shallow. And at this point, I think that she should learn more about the Jewish religion, that it's not just a thing about bagels on Sunday. And then, you can make she could present what her position is to a rabbi. On the other hand, I mean, it may be that she's so committed and a rabbi who knows her says, well, she is going to do this. She's that kind of person. Then that's fine. But I think it's the rabbi's decision anyway. I think at this point, from a conservative standpoint, I think it's probably premature.
Yeah, I mean, the story that you told us, she was not fully committed. She just didn't care that much about her Catholicism.
Right.
And it's like what we do as conservative Jews, as in Kehillat Shalom, we've done it for 50 years, is we've taken advantage of the American take on the bar mitzvah to use that as, I mean, the whole conservative movement does this, to use that as a lever to take a kid and teach him what he needs to know, because we tell the parents, you got to punch the ticket of a bar mitzvah, and you can't do that unless he goes to class or he learns. It's not, forgive me, I don't think it's true. I mean, I think that bar mitzvah is a chronological thing and not anything else. I think it happens if you live on a farm and you're 13. Next thing you know, the father gets to thank God he lived to the point where he is no longer responsible for your sins, and that's the extent of the bar mitzvah. That's the only thing that's the requirement. Likewise, anyway, that I would think that any rabbi would take advantage of an opportunity to teach and to make sure that it's not being done strictly superficially, although legally, I think the kids are right.
Right. So let me say a few things. First of all, just to clear up the halachically, there's no question that she's a Jew.
Right.
Okay. I mean, even if she had been baptized as an adult, a Jew who gets baptized is a wet, sinful Jew. Right? I mean, you cannot un-Jew yourself.
All right.
Okay. Having said that, you can remove yourself from the privileges of being part of the Jewish community, right? In other words, somebody who was Jewish who converted to Christianity as an adult, we wouldn't count them for a minion, right? We wouldn't give them an aliyah. We wouldn't make them man or woman of the year. We wouldn't give them, the men's club blue yarmulke. Okay. But having said that, as I mentioned 4 weeks ago, right? If I call up the McDougal's next door and I say, I'm going to Wegmans, do you need anything? And Max says, yeah, could you pick me up 2 pounds of pork chops? I got no problem with that, right? If my next door neighbor was a Jew who converted to Christianity, I could not pick them up pork chops at Wegmans because they're still Jewish and I am not allowed to assist them in committing that transgression, regardless of how they consider themselves. Okay, so halachically, there's no question that this young woman is a Jew. And if I officiate at the wedding, I do not jeopardize my standing with the rabbinical assembly, okay, as I would if I officiated at a wedding between, a Jew and somebody who is clearly a non-Jew.
Rabino.
What?
But if the person is considered fully Jewish, why don't they count for minyan? Or is that outside the scope of this class?
It's not outside the scope of this. They don't count for a minyan because we're punishing them. Essentially, we're punishing them. Having said that, that would apply to the woman's mother. I don't know that it would apply to her. Right. So now,
if it's punishment, if you're like one person short and you needed them, could you?
Look, I think it's a very individual question, right? I mean, unfortunately, Jews who convert to Christianity but still want to be counted in the minyan are generally trying to prove a point. Okay, that is to say, you can accept Jesus and still be a Jew. Okay, and therefore the answer is no, you can't accept them as a minyan because you are allowing them, in other words, right? So, well, what do you mean I can't believe in Jesus and still be a Jew? I went to shul and I was counted for the minyan. This is the problem. I mean, it gets into, polemics, right? Because otherwise, what are you doing in shul, right? If you become a Christian, you become a Christian, right? Like Barnaby said, choose one or the other, right? I mean, as an example, right? As an example where this question would come up, Cardinal Lustiger, right? Cardinal Lustiger, who was the Cardinal Archbishop of Paris, right? He was born in France to Polish Jewish immigrant parents. During the Holocaust, he hid in a monastery, converted to Catholicism, became a priest, ultimately became a cardinal. And yet he insisted that he was still a Jew. Okay, and he would go to shul on his parents' yortzites to say Kaddish. Okay, now he's dead now, but if Cardinal Lustiger showed up at our shul, would I allow him to say Kaddish? Of course I would allow him to say Kaddish. Would I treat him with respect as a cardinal, a prince? Of course. Would I count him in the minyan? I would not. Okay, because with all due respect to Cardinal Lustiger's insistence, not that he's still a Jew, halachically he's still a Jew, the claim is not that halakhically I'm still a Jew. The claim is that being a Roman Catholic priest and cardinal is not inconsistent with my Judaism. It's a completion, a fulfillment of my Judaism, and we don't accept that, right? So I would treat him with respect. I would certainly not, kick him out of the shul or prevent him from saying Kaddish, but I would essentially treat him as an honored non-Jewish guest. In the same way that if a non-Jew showed up and wanted to say Kaddish, we wouldn't stop them either, right?
So that I understand. And as a rabbi, or would rabbis do this because it's the generally accepted interpretation, or is it that you're not permitted to count them as part of a minyan?
My interpretation of halakha is that you're not permitted to count them as a minyan, part of a minyan. Having said that, it's not a rabbinic standard. It's not like you could get drummed out of the rabbinical assembly if you did so, right? And we certainly don't, I mean, it's entirely possible that we have counted Jews who converted to Christianity in the minyan in the past.
We
had given them aliyahs, right? But we wouldn't know that. I mean, it's not like we interrogate people about their theology before we count them for the minyan or give them an aliyah. Mike, yeah.
We had a situation at Kehilat Shalom a number of years ago where a group of Messianic Jews were coming to Kehilat Shalom, and they would come wearing a tallis on Saturday morning, and sitting quietly. They weren't demanding service or anything, but they also were coming to classes, and they ended up being more of them than us. Right. And eventually our then president went up to the guy sitting there, and he said, "I'm sorry, but you're going to have to leave. You can't be a part of this congregation." And the guy said, "But I'm sitting quietly, and I'm not being nasty or rude or aggressive." And the president said, "That's why I'm asking you so politely." Right. That's why we're talking so politely. But he put an end to it, and then the guy went home and told all his buddies, and so they stopped showing up. It wasn't a halakhic question, but they were what you call, right, apostates.
Right. Now, having said that, most people in those groups are not actually halakhically Jewish. I mean, we're getting deep into the weeds with this, so I won't overplay it. But they are mostly Gentiles who want to live the way they think that Jesus lived. Okay, they're mostly not halachically Jews, but that's a whole different story. And anyway, I would just note that the question that I asked you all is not would you do the marriage or would you not do the marriage? It's how would you deal with this request? Okay, and some of you, I think, would have done what I actually did. Okay, which is now a couple of you said there's no conversion, or is there? There's not a conversion, okay? But there is this thing called divrei haverut, okay? Let's call it words of fellowship.
Words of,
okay, where a person who is halachically a Jew but has lived as part of another religious community and wants to now affirm their desire to live exclusively as part of the Jewish community. They can study if that's necessary. Depends on their background. I mean, this young girl, if that's what she wanted, she would have to study because she didn't even know that she was Jewish, let alone know anything about Judaism. All right, if somebody was born and raised a Jew, converted, and then decided they wanted to come back, then they don't need to study, right? But they appear before a Beit Din they renounce their prior affiliation and pledge to live their lives as part of the Jewish community. Okay, so it's not a conversion, but it is a sort of formal renunciation of their non-Jewish affiliation and affirmation of their Judaism. Um, so in fact, now the question of study is interesting because I actually met this couple. This was when I was the Hillel Rabbi at American University in the early 90s. I was teaching a 10-course session through the Jewish Study Center called Introduction to Judaism. It was not a conversion course per se, but it was mostly aimed precisely at non-Jews who were either married to or getting married to Jews, who wanted to know more about their Jewish partner's background, right? So she was already studying. So what I did was when they came to me, because I already knew them from the class, I said, look, I mean, here is my question to you. Are you asking me as a rabbi to marry two Jews because you now consider yourself to be a Jew? Or are you asking me as a rabbi to do a wedding between a Jew and a Catholic who technically qualifies to be married by a rabbi because of her mother? And she said to me, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. And I said, which look, I mean, you guys know me well enough, right? I mean, if I say to you, that's a good question, I don't know the answer. So I said to her, why don't you go home, think about the answer to that question, and when you have an answer, come back and we'll talk some more. And she did that, and they came back about 2 weeks later, and she said, you know what? I'm not a Jew. I understand that halakhically I'm a Jew, but I'm still a Catholic. I'm not a very observant Catholic. I'm not a very enthusiastic Catholic, but you don't escape 12 years of Catholic education quite that easily. I am still a Catholic. And I said, I totally respect what you're saying, and you understand why I can't officiate at your wedding. And she said, absolutely, I understand. So that was fine. You know, that was fine. And in that situation, I'm entirely comfortable with the way I handled it. And I say, I mean, I liked her. I liked them. I wish she had said, no, yeah, now I realize that I'm really a Jew. And what do we do about that? And then so that's how we handled it. Any questions or comments? All right, if not, we'll go on to case number 3. And this is one that I had not, and I'll tell you the story. So in preparation for teaching this class tonight, I threw out a question in the conservative rabbis discussion group, saying, these are the 2 cases I'm talking. Has anybody else had an interesting case like this, and that you would be willing to discuss with me so I can discuss it with my class? And this young rabbi came and he told me a story, and it jarred my memory that I had exactly the same story. Okay, so I'm not using his people, I'm using my people. And he was kind of disappointed because he thought it was novel and interesting, and it turned out to be not that novel and not that interesting. But here it is. So let me find case number 3. Okay, Steve and Catherine. Steve and Catherine are engaged to be married. Neither Steve nor Catherine were raised in any religion. Steve is of partial Native American ancestry and considers himself spiritual but not religious, as does Catherine. Steve's best friend has a brother who is a rabbi. Steve has met this rabbi on a couple of occasions and thinks he seems like a nice guy. Steve suggests to Catherine that they ask this rabbi to marry them in a ceremony that has some spiritual elements, but one that is not particular to any specific religion, and Catherine agrees. Steve discusses this with the rabbi. The rabbi says he's open to the idea, but has never met Catherine, so the rabbi suggests that the three of them meet to discuss the possibility of him conducting their wedding ceremony. When the three of them meet, the rabbi discovers that although Catherine was not raised in any religion, her father is Jewish and she has a typically Jewish last name. You are the rabbi who's been asked to conduct this wedding. What do you do?
No.
Huh?
No.
No, why not? Why not, Mike?
What you have said before is that to a rabbi halakhically, what you need is kedushin to perform a wedding. It has to be kedushin, and this simply isn't. I mean, the father being Jewish is, and in this case, little more than a coincidence. It's not like she was raised Jewish, and the groom absolutely has no connection to Judaism except for having a friend who has a friend who has a brother. It's coincidental, but it's certainly not kedushin.
Wait, but they're not
Right,
Jewish,
it's not
so why does it
Kedushin,
matter?
It doesn't
but,
matter
they're
to
not
them. It
Kedushin.
matters to the rabbi, because I don't think. I mean, I don't know if if you were rabbi, if you were the guy asked, you, as I understand it, you cannot do it because that's not kedushin. So you could do, if I understand correctly, you could do a ceremony. If I remember correctly, when you were being interviewed for this job, some kid came into your face and said, would you perform a wedding for two gay guys? And you answered, I would perform a ceremony for two gay guys. It would be different, but it would suffice, in effect, is what you were saying. It would not be kedushin, it would be something else. And that's where you'd be on this thing. These people are not Jewish.
Right. I mean, essentially what they're asking me to do is, look, I mean, it's certainly not a Jewish wedding. It's not Kedushin. There's no Kedushin between two non-Jews. But they're saying, look, you're a nice guy. The state has given you the authority to sign marriage licenses. Come say a few nice words and sign our marriage license, right? Nobody's pretending that it's Kedushin,
Right.
right? And so where's the harm?
No, I think you would say yes.
No.
Yeah, Barnaby.
This is where I would differ, because there are clearly major sociological factors here with regards to the rabbi's position alone. If we're going to treat that as just a civil ceremony, just happen to be officiated by someone who has been empowered by the state to marry two people, then sign a few sheets of paper and you get done with it. But as it stands, commit, because we know that there's there's no halachic issue if for a rabbi to perform a civil marriage between non-Jews. But if I were to be asked to officiate at a wedding with spiritual practices, that comes off as a red flag to not only me personally, but also the rabbinical assembly that might be staring down my back, the RCA, whoever my governing authority is, it would not appear very well on my track record. It would seem like as if I was abusing my, authorities to do a personal favor or something.
So anybody else? All right.
I'm
so
sort of-
now-
I'm sort of
Dan?
on Barmby's side in that if it's a public service and you're known as a rabbi, they would be thinking you would be acting as a rabbi. And so that you could not officiate at this ceremony.
Right. No,
And I think
actually, go ahead.
No, I think you've said it before in terms of even attending the ceremony might be problematic.
Right. Now, so attending the ceremony, I mean, you are recalling correctly the standard of rabbinic practice of the rabbinical assembly that precluded not only officiating at an intermarriage, but even attending as a guest. That part of the standard was rescinded within the last 3-4 years. Okay, so it is now permissible for a conservative rabbi to attend an intermarriage as a guest, but not to officiate. Now, as it turned out, I mean, to me, the issue specifically hinged on the young woman's father and last name, right? In other words, we understand that halachically she's not a Jew. Sociologically, she's not a Jew in the sense that she doesn't consider herself to be a Jew, but sociologically she could be a Jew in, Sartre's definition, right? Sartre said that a Jew is somebody who Gentiles hate as a Jew, right? And she could certainly be the victim of anti-Semitism because of her father and her last name, regardless of how she self-identifies. So when I discovered that she had a Jewish father and a Jewish sounding last name, I decided that it looked too much like an intermarriage for it to be worthwhile for me to participate. Had she not had Jewish ancestry and a Jewish sounding last name, I would have done the ceremony. And yes, my position today, man, this was when I was at AU Hillel. I was at AU Hillel from 91 to 95. Okay, so it's at least 25 years ago. I don't remember exactly when this took place, but it's at least 25 years ago. I don't hold in all things today the way I held back then. But I'm glad I didn't do the wedding because now, Stan, you raised the standard of rabbinic practice. Part of the standard of rabbinic practice is that conservative rabbis are not supposed to officiate at a wedding between two non-Jews. Okay, we're not supposed to do it. Now, having said that, the RA had not at that point done a very good job of publicizing its standards. Okay, so had she not been in this problematic sort of liminal situation, had I gone ahead and done the wedding, I would have been in violation of the RA standard. Now, what would they have done? Probably nothing, because I would have said, oh, man, I didn't even know, and it's not like it even looks, but that is the rule. Although it is probably the standard that is most widely violated now. I mean, so I didn't do it, but the reason that I didn't do it was not that it wasn't Kiddushin and not that it wasn't and not that it was a violation of the standard, but I didn't do it because it looked like people could reasonably conclude that it was an intermarriage. And there's also, when you're a Hillel rabbi in a city, it's different than when you're a pulpit rabbi in a suburb. Okay. I mean, I got asked regularly to officiate at intermarriages. I have, in 9 years here, never been asked to officiate at an intermarriage because people simply know, right? People simply know, oh, this is a conservative shul. Whereas if you're a Hillel rabbi, you're not any particular denomination. People think, well, he serves college kids, he's young, so he must be liberal, he must be progressive, therefore, he might do it. And they're just, and this is why when they say, well, but you should use it as an opportunity for education, they're just going down a list, right? They're just going down a list. And whether I'm first on the list because American starts with an A, or I'm first on the list because Aryan starts with an A, right? They're not looking for a long discussion, right? It's Rabbi, will you or won't you? Okay, because if you won't, don't waste my time. I'll go to the next name on the list, right? So, you can have these well-meaning, engage them. To engage in discussion, two people have to be willing to engage in that discussion. And the person on the other end of the phone generally was not. Now, in the second case, they were, because I had a relationship with them already. But that was really the exception to the rule. And halakhically, I could have done it. Halakhically, I definitely could have done it. It just didn't sit well with me.
Right.
So that, I mean, the over point is that sometimes this is complicated business, and halakha is the first place that we start, but it's not always the last, because case 2 and case 3, in both cases, I could have halakhically done the wedding. Right. In case 3, I would have been in violation of an RA standard, but it's not a halakhic standard. Right. I could have halakhically done the wedding, but just because it was halakhically permissible didn't mean that I felt it was something that I was comfortable with. So I ultimately didn't do it. And in retrospect, because of this one, I'm glad I didn't do it, because I would have been, committing a big no-no. But what did I know then? I was, as a kid. All right, any comments or questions? All right, yeah, Alan.
Well, I don't want to go on and on about this, but this whole area is disturbing. First off, you can go to the courthouse when it's open, and they have a clerk who's
Right.
there and can officiate, and you can have whatever party you want and have whatever speakers you want. So people can get married in this country. The synagogue's point of view, the conservative movement, the Orthodox movement, their thought is let's make sure both the people are Jewish, and they want the kids to be raised Jewish, and they want to perpetuate. But that's not been the history. More and more, there's a group and groups that go to Hebrew school, they do whatever, and then they find other people. We have that in our educational system. We have that in our college system. People meet other people. They're good people.
Absolutely.
And they're going to be good parents, and they're going to be good helpmates, and hopefully they can have some spiritual life together too. It's hard to reconcile the two. And as time goes on, my guess is that more and more people will have less and less affiliation. Our synagogue, what are we down to, 100 family units or something? And I don't think that's all that unusual, because you need to have a product that people really care about. I don't know the answer to this. I just sort of start to know the problem. And it's in society's interest to have family units that are good, solid parents with good values, and can teach a love and the compassion that we're proud of as our Jewish heritage, and our belief in a supreme being. But what you're touching on here is, in my opinion, a huge topic.
Sure.
No, it's a massive topic. I mean, let me I have a few thoughts, right? Because you raised a lot of different issues. One is that, look, your point about the decline of affiliation, I mean, is empirically correct. I mean, the Federation sponsored a demographic study of the greater Washington Jewish community a couple of years ago that was, done by professional demographers who know what they're doing, and discovered that in the last 20 years, the absolute number of synagogue members in greater Washington had declined slightly, only slightly, while the overall Jewish population had increased by 40%. So there you have it, right? Now, if it were up to me, I would take away from all clergy the right to register marriages, right? In many countries in Europe and in Mexico, for example, you can have whatever religious ceremony you want, but if you want it to be considered valid by the government, you go down to the courthouse and the registrar does it. I am in favor of that because I mean, again, I don't get these requests now because, people know, but when who are you to tell me I can't get married? I'm not telling you you can't get married. I'm not telling you you can't get married. I wish you well. I just can't be the officiant, right? Go down to the courthouse. And, I think that, if I had the courage of my convictions, I would simply say I'm not going to sign marriage licenses anymore, right? Two Jews want me, I'll officiate at your chuppah, but find somebody else to sign the marriage license, right? But then they look at me and they say, Rabbi, why are you being a pain in the ass, right? So I do it, but I'm not. I would be happier if the government would take that privilege away from us. Now, and I'm gonna stop recording now, and you'll see why.